see any hands or anybody waving. On last week, we were studying from First Corinthians, mainly from chapter 7, uh, and just dealing with what Paul was talking about in the marital duties of the husband and the wife, um, talking about love, the four Greek words that were used uh, for love. And we were just discussing those things as it regards to the one flesh relationship. Uh, how the husband is supposed to regard the wife, and the wife is to regard the husband. And in looking at love, as we stated, the four Greek words, which is agape, phileo, storge, and eros. Um, Agape being the highest form of love. That's the kind of love that God has for us. And in a husband-wife relationship, really all four of those loves should be realized. And what we want to talk about and look at, on last week we mentioned that love should not be just emotional. Love should not be just about feelings, because all the time you don't feel good about your spouse. There are times when you might be having some differences. You might be having an argument, and you just don't feel good about your spouse at that time, but you should still love your spouse. That is where agape comes in, because even though you might not feel like they're phileo, they're not your friend at that particular moment, you still should have agape for your spouse. Certainly, there might not be the feeling of eros, but you should still have agape for your spouse. And we want to look at the fact that love is more than just emotional, but it is behavioral. Because we talk about the fact that there are those who say, well, we fell out of love, or we grew apart, or whatever the case. Love doesn't end. If you love your spouse, and especially in the marital relationship, that one flesh relationship, you should never fall out of love, but you should continue to love one another, irregardless of what kind of issues you might have. Look with me in First Corinthians chapter 13, where Paul talks about love. In First Corinthians 13, I want to read verses 4 through 8, and I want to read it from the New International Version, where it says, love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. So if we love one another, like I said, we might not always feel good about one another, but love never fails. We'll have our differences, we'll have our disagreements, but in all of that, we could and should still love one another, because love is not just emotional, even though there are emotional aspects of love, but the love we ought to have, the highest form of love, is behavioral. And so Paul talks about love here in 1 Corinthians 13, and we've certainly discussed this before, but we can see that love is something that never fails. That's the bottom line in verse number 8. Love never fails. So you don't grow out of love. I love you today, or I loved you last week, but we had an argument today and I don't love you anymore. And stuff like that cause problems. It can cause tension in a relationship. It can cause relationships to grow apart, but they shouldn't grow apart, because if you love one another, you still care about one another. Now, in the King James, in verse number 4, Paul said, charity suffereth long. If you remember the definition of long suffering is bearing with difficult people. So sometimes our spouses can be difficult people. Sometimes I might be the source of the difficulty. You might be the difficult one, and your spouse has got to bear with you, and you certainly have got to bear with your spouse. So in the word patient, certainly bearing up under difficult circumstances, or long suffering, bearing with difficult people. Certainly when you're not agreeing with one another, the circumstances are difficult, but you still have to bear with one another. You certainly should not have such hard feelings toward each other that those dreadful words come out of people's mouths. I hate you. That should never be said to your spouse. But there are relationships where it gets to the point that because of disagreements and differences, people have the tendency to say that. But as Christians, we have definitely got to bear with one another, and especially our spouse. Love is kind. And remember, we talked a while back, sometimes we have our disagreements. We might ride to the church building together. Some folks drive different cars. But when we get at the church building, we kind to everybody else, but we're not kind to our spouse. And I hope it don't get to the point that the tension is so strong that you tell your spouse, you go sit back there. Hopefully that won't be the case. But if you can be kind to everybody else, then why can't you be kind to your spouse? You have disagreements with other folks and you still wind up getting along with them. Why can't you have disagreements with your spouse and still be kind to your spouse? Again, this is right behavior towards our spouse. Not only is love kind, he said it does not envy, and certainly there shouldn't be envy among spouses. It does not boast. It's not arrogant, in other words. It's not acting like it's bigger than somebody else, or I'm better than you, or whatever the case. It does not boast. And so we as Christians certainly should not have that attitude. As a matter of fact, the Bible teaches us to esteem others better than ourselves. And what we studied in Ephesians chapter 5 is that I should love my spouse as I love myself. And so if I love myself, then I'm not going to boast against myself. I'm not going to be arrogant against myself. So the opposite of boasting is being humility. The opposite of lifting ourselves up, esteeming ourselves higher than others, is humbling ourselves. Not only does love not boast, love is not proud. And sometimes pride can cause problems in relationship. Pride also goes against humility. Arrogance, pride, these are the things that keeps us from being humble. These are the things that won't allow us to say sometimes, I'm sorry, or I apologize, or I was wrong, or you're right. Pride keeps us from humbling ourselves, and pride can also cause tension in the relationship. Arrogance, boasting, being proud can create tension in the relationship that can cause problems for a long time. And I believe that husbands and wives certainly should be open, and love makes us, in other words, vulnerable to one another. Pride keeps us from being vulnerable. It keeps us from being tender. It keeps us from being compassionate. And sometimes we need to be compassionate. Sometimes we just need to be vulnerable. And especially when it is your spouse, you're supposed to be open, completely open and transparent to your spouse. You should be. Now, I know relationships where that does not exist, but those are relationships where you've got some tensions. So the thing that we want to do is eliminate the tension. And this is what Paul is talking about. Love causes us not to be arrogant, causes us not to be proud, but it causes us to be humble, causes us to be open, and causes us to be vulnerable. Verse 5, Paul said, it does not dishonor others. And we certainly should not dishonor or disrespect our spouse. As a matter of fact, we really shouldn't disrespect anybody. And even if they deserve disrespect, we should not disrespect our spouse. The thing that we're supposed to do is to have the highest regard. And again, in Ephesians chapter 5, if a husband loves his wife to the point that he's willing to give himself for his wife, he's going to have a high regard for his wife, a lot of respect for his wife. The wife is told to reverence her husband or have a high respect, a high regard for her husband. And that respect for one another should grow. Now, it's kind of hard to be married to somebody you don't respect. And what would get you to the point that you don't respect one another? There should be the highest respect in marriage. Husbands should respect wives above everybody else. Wives should respect husbands above everybody else. As we said, the husband and wife relationship, the one flesh relationship, should be the strongest, closest bond that you have on the earth. And remember, nobody gets between that bond in that relationship. Not parents, not siblings, not children, not best friends. And as I said, your best friend should be your spouse. You might have other close friends, but your best friend should be your spouse. If your best friend is not your spouse, then you need to probably do some work on that relationship. And so, respect, having a high respect for your spouse is important. Verse 5 also says, it is not self seeking. And love is really always other person centered. Love is not self centered. It's not about me. It's not about what's best for me. It's not just about what I like. What we've got to do is seek to please one another. I should want to love and do what is best for my spouse more than I should want to do it for myself. Now, certainly, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do what is beneficial for myself, but I should also want to do what is beneficial for my spouse. That's the kind of love that we should have in marriage. And I should always be concerned about her best interests, just as well as she should always be concerned about my best interests. So it's not self-seeking, but it's other person benefiting. We're supposed to do what is beneficial for the other person. That's the kind of love that we should have in a marital relationship. And when the husband is trying to love his wife more than she loves him, and the wife is trying to love the husband more than he loves her, you're going to have a loving relationship. And that's the kind of relationship that it should be, where you love your other person, your other half, better than you love yourself. And again, this is what Paul is talking about in Philippians 2 about esteeming others better than yourself. You certainly ought to esteem your wife. Put their concerns before your own. Not only is love not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. And it's a bad day. It's a bad relationship when whatever your husband says just sets you off, or whatever your wife says just sets you off. You know, you can't. The poor man is walking around on eggshells, afraid to say anything because whatever he says, you just get upset. That shouldn't be. And certainly, it shouldn't be in either party, husband or wife. The thing that you've got to do, if you love one another, then you're not easily angered with one another. It goes back to being long-suffering with one another. Now, if that is the case, that your spouse just sets you off and you're easily angered with your spouse, then you need to work on yourself. You need to work on what it is that causes you to get so angry when your spouse says something or does something, when they come into the house. The hair on the back of your neck stand up. There's something wrong with that. What we've got to do is we've got to find out what that problem is, and we've got to work on it. As a matter of fact, you're going to have to focus on loving your spouse and being kind to your spouse and respecting your spouse, and just being nice, just being kind to the spouse, rather than allowing your spouse to get you in a tizzy. So the thing that we're going to have to learn to do is get rid of that anger or that tension. I think I see a hand. Angie, Jerry?
Oh, I didn't want to say the thing that you're saying is so true. I thought about Jesus. What if he would get upset going to the cross? What would happen? You know, like the spouse get upset. They ain't want to do this, do that. I thought about Jesus. If he would do the same thing, we wouldn't be here today. But he was willing to die for the whole world.
Yeah, yeah.
And he went through.
Yeah. And that's what Paul said in Ephesians 5:25, that the husband is supposed to love the wife like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Christ, and that is the example of the kind of love that the husband should have for the wife, in protecting the wife, in caring for the wife, doing what is beneficial for the wife. That is the kind of love that we've got to have. And that love certainly is a long-suffering love, because you just think about the church. Do we do all that the Lord wants us to do all the time? Do we conduct ourselves in the way we ought to all the time? Certainly, there are times when the Lord should be mad at us for stuff that we do, but he's long-suffering, he's compassionate, he's kind, and that's what we've got to learn to do with one another.
Brother Tucker, can you elaborate a little bit on how to resolve conflict between how that can be handled better? Because, you know, I think that it may be some women, but sometimes men, or some men, I'm not gonna call any names, have problems communicating. They're not good at communicating.
Yeah.
And you know, if your wife is upset about something, you need to know how to research it, dissect it. You know, you need to kind of connect. You need to know how to emotionally connect so that you can find out what's wrong and not just be debatable or just brush it off. But you need to know how to be, so what would you recommend? Because that's a problem, I think, in marriages. This is conflict resolution.
Yeah. And, there are rules to conflict resolution, because if there's an issue, what we've got to learn to do is deal with the issue, attack the issue, and not the individual. I believe the biggest problem is we attack the individual. You do this, you said this, you ain't this, you ain't. Well, that problem of attacking the individual tends to put individuals on the defense. Whenever there's an issue, I think you need to sit down and set some ground rules that we're going to talk about the issue. We're going to talk about the problem. And we need to be able to talk about it without getting angry. I need to give you my perspective, and you need to listen. That's the one thing we got to learn to do. We need to learn to talk one at a time, because whenever somebody is talking, trying to make a point or whatever, and then they're interrupted, that again creates tension. So we've got to respect one another to the point to where I listen at your perspective in regards to the issue, and then you listen at my perspective in regards to the issue. And while one is talking, the other needs to listen. If you want to respond, take notes so that you can respond to whatever, but let the other person talk. But we've got to also be respectful of one another, in that I don't just talk for 5 minutes, go on and on and on and on and on, and then don't allow you to talk. It's got to be a conversation, and you've got to deal with the issue. Whatever the issue is, you've got to lay it out on the table. You've got to make it clear to each other. I need to give you my perspective, and then you need to give me your perspective. And then we need to look at what is causing the difficulty in the relationship. And if I'm the source of the difficulty, then I need to make some changes. Or if I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, what we've got to do is we've got to look at these things reasonably, because sometimes folk get upset. I can remember Mary coming talking and telling me her problems, you know, having a rough day at work, and I'm giving her solutions to the problem. Well, she didn't want solutions. She just wanted to talk. She just wanted to air it out. She didn't want solutions to the problem. So I had to learn to listen. And I had to learn to ask some right questions to find out what she wanted to do about it, or if she wanted to do anything about it. And we've got to be able to communicate with one another in that regard, listen to one another, ask questions to one another. But we do have to use some tact in how we talk to one another. We just can't, you know, not be concerned about one another's feelings, because words do have impact. And so I think in order to resolve a conflict, we've got to understand the rules about respecting one another, getting the perspectives of one another, working through whatever the issue is. And that, somebody said, a good marriage is like a good tennis match. It's back and forth within the boundaries. So you got to keep it in bounds according to the rules, talking without getting angry, without somebody storming out of the room or whatever, but work through the problem.
So when does a mediator come in?
When y'all can't work through the problem. when y'all can't solve the problem yourself, that's when you need some help.
Yeah, okay.
And you know, as we've been talking about in this, there are times when you need marital counseling. Marriage counseling is something that's, you know, that's real. And if you need marital counseling, then seek it, especially in a case where you got a problem that's just festering in the relationship. And it's like I was just talking about. When he or she walks in the room, the hair on the back of your neck stand up. You need some help. All right, I see a couple other hands. I saw Edith's hand first, and then Lisa. Go ahead.
Yes.
Or let me be sure, Angie, that kind of deals with your question for now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, Edith.
Okay. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Don't everybody jump on me at one time, but having been married and having been in relationships unmarried, it has been my experience that men, on an average, they are not good communicators. You know, they can't talk, they can't communicate. That's my comment.
Well, communication is a two-way street.
Yes.
And men are able to communicate as well as women. It's how you communicate. And again, as I said, it's a back and forth. And you've got to have the patience to deal with one another back and forth. You've got to be able to express what it is you're feeling, put it into words. And again, just dealing with one another, you will find that there are some men who are just as compassionate communicators as women, and some who are more so. So we can't make a blanket statement that men are not good communicators, because some are. Many of them are. And there are some women who don't like to communicate. Well, you just talk too much. You want to talk all the time. Well, what we've got to do, again, is we've got to be long-suffering with one another. And we've got to look at the fact that if there's an issue, we got to deal with that issue thoroughly in order to bring about resolution. And so that's going to take time on the part of both, on the man and the woman. And so, and we've got to work at communicate. Communication is work, because everybody don't want to take the time to put their thoughts or their feelings into words. And in a marriage relationship, that's what you've got to work at. Again, I talked about love makes us vulnerable. Well, you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to put your feelings and your thoughts into words and share with your spouse. So that's going to take some time. It's going to take some work, but men can do it as well as women. Lisa?
I think Harry was before me.
Okay.
Did you have something to say, Harry?
He said, go ahead.
No? Okay. Right, okay, going back to what you had said first about spouses coming in and hair raised, and tying into what Angie said too. That's what, you've talked before about learning your spouse and knowing your spouse. If your spouse knows that they come home and shoes in the middle of the floor, then that kind of sets your spouse off. And when you hear your spouse outside, shoes in the middle of the floor or whatever it would be, and you don't move it, I mean, just what sets your spouse off. And it's because, you guys are around each other more. And then as to what Angie was saying too, about the spouse needs to investigate, I think too, that has to do with learning your spouse. You should, at a point, you should know when there's something wrong with your spouse. You should know, how they want to be asked. That's kind of into learning each other. And I had a young lady today, she's fairly newlywed, and she was telling me she wanted to learn how to be a good wife. And, I told her, I said, just because somebody gets married doesn't mean they know how to be a wife, no more than somebody who has a baby just know how to be a mother. And, I told her too, I said, the best place you can go to learn it is the Bible. And she was telling me that she was reading something, and she said it had a lot of Bible scriptures on it. And I gave her information for the night and told her that's what you were talking on Wednesday nights too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our Wednesday night studies, we've got them recorded and they're on YouTube. So if they missed a study, they can go back and pick them up on YouTube. Now I just got Wednesday night Bible study. I don't have a topic, like a specific topic, but you can refer to the date that, we talk about these issues in order to help somebody who want to just get some information about the marital relationship. But yes, we do have to learn to communicate with one another. And if your spouse is not a good communicator, then the thing that you've got to do is you've got to work with your spouse on communicating. Y'all have to talk. And sometimes at the dinner table, that's a good time to talk. While you're sitting watching TV is a good time to talk. As a matter of fact, conversation can and should get so good that you turn the TV off and you talk with one another. And as we pointed out from 1 Peter chapter 3, the husband is supposed to learn his wife, dwell with them according to knowledge, as well as the wife learn the husband. You've got to learn one another. You've got to learn what makes one another happy, what makes one another sad, what makes one another mad. Certainly you ought to know one another's triggers. And you don't want to do the thing that, sets your spouse off. And we've got to learn over time. Now, I don't know about everybody else, but Mary didn't have to tell me 10 times to pick up my dirty underwear and put it in the hamper rather than just leave it in the bathroom or in the bedroom. She didn't have to tell me 10 times that I need to put my shoes, where they're supposed to go, or hang up my clothes, or I need to clean up behind myself. I need to clean out my sink as well as her sink. I could clean up as well as she could clean. I could wash dishes, I could scrub floors, I didn't cook much. Now that's one thing she was always unhappy about, but we didn't go hungry. When she didn't feel like cooking, we always ate. But those things that cause problems like that shouldn't continue to cause problems. We've got to learn to do for ourselves, contribute to the relationship, to the housekeeping, because I know that from old times, housekeeping, cooking and washing dishes and all of that stuff was the woman's work. But then that's when we had housewives, the wife stayed at home. Now that the wife is in the workplace, certainly she's contributing to the breadwinning. The husband got to contribute to the housekeeping. So we've got to be considerate of one another, and those things that could cause problems in the relationship like that, we certainly have got to talk about. I see a couple other hands. Let me get Pam Brunson and then Sister Brown.
Okay, my question is, how do you deal with it when one or the other of the spouse is always on the defense when there's any type of communications? How do you deal with that aspect of it?
Well, again, we got to try to diffuse it. What is he apprehensive about? If we want to talk about something, and understand sometimes in asking questions or making statements, again, we want to deal with an issue and not the individual. And so even though the individual might be precipitating the issue, what we want to do is deal with the issue. And sometimes we've got to ask questions to diffuse, because if this is causing a problem in the relationship, do we want to eliminate the problem? Do we want to eliminate the tension in the relationship? Do we want to be on, a good level of kindness and just be able to deal with one another without all of the tension? Because if I'm always tense when I come around you, or you always tense when you come around me, that doesn't make for good relationship. And you got to get rid of the tension. You got to get rid of whatever issues that's causing apprehension and tension in the relationship. So those things you have to talk about. And if the spouse is unwilling to talk about it, then you got to find out why. Because if it's creating problems, because of this, I'm unhappy. And because I'm unhappy, you ought to be concerned about me being unhappy. Because if I'm unhappy, don't you come smooching up on me talking about eros when I'm unhappy. So what we got to do is we got to work out the phileo. We got to get rid of the tension and create friendship and harmony in the relationship. And so that means we've got to deal with the issue. We've got to talk about whatever it is that's causing the problem. And if you don't want to talk about it, then maybe, as Angie suggested, maybe we need a referee. We need somebody to help us work through this problem. So we definitely got to try to work through. I see hands keep flying up here, boy. This must be getting good. Sister Brown.
Yes, Brother Tucker. I just kind of want to piggyback a little bit onto a little bit of what you said earlier and what Lisa said. Just like, for instance, recently, just in my home personally, I've not been feeling well, and we didn't know why until Friday. I actually had oral surgery on yesterday. I've been having really bad headaches for like a week. And I just came to my husband and I explained to him, I'm doing all I can to keep going. I know it's some things that I normally do that I'm not doing. And I just want you to be patient with me. And that brings in that long suffering and that understanding and knowing your spouse, like Lisa said. sometimes things will be going on and you just don't verbalize it with your spouse. It's just going on and you're just doing all you can not to complain and to keep things going. And that's where you have to actually learn your spouse and know that, well, normally she doesn't do this, you know, or normally she doesn't leave her shoes in the floor, matter of fact. Or she usually, you know, keep it kind of tidier than she does. She keep her closet door closed or whatever the case may be. You just have to understand that those sometimes are little nitpicky things. I know my husband like it tidy, he like it clean, he like it tidy, and I've just not been feeling well. So it's certain things that I just haven't been able to do the last 2 weeks. And I'm grateful that I had a compassionate husband that understood. I had my surgery yesterday, and he took care of me yesterday. But that long suffering and that patience and not getting upset because things wasn't the way he liked it to be. So sometimes it's hard to acknowledge it because I don't always talk about it. But with maturity and you trying to grow in your relationship, you start verbalizing things better. But in the early days, I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't like that. I didn't always say I don't feel well or this, that, and the other. And if something wasn't done, he was like, well, Tracy, you know, you normally do such and such. I wouldn't even explain. I would just go ahead and do whatever. But with time, I think it takes growth. Like Lisa said, when you have a baby, you don't know how to be a mother. So I think it's just growth in it. Or learning, like lessons like what you're giving tonight. I'm even learning things. I've been married going on 25 years. So, you know, it's still new things to learn while you are married. So it's a learning process. So I appreciate the lesson, by the way, but I just want to kind of piggyback on that because some people think it's perfect and it's not.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Brittany Smith.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on something that Pam said and Angie. I think it kind of ties together. I know Pam brought up the thing about people being on the defense, and I think a lot of times it has to do with not necessarily what we want to talk about, but it has a lot to do with how you approach them to do it. Check your tone, check your body posture. Like, are you coming at them on 10? Meet them at a level that they feel comfortable talking to you in, because it very well, it could be something very small, but if you're coming at them with a whole lot of energy, they're not going to want to talk to you, especially if your spouse is not that confrontational type person. If they don't know how to communicate their feelings, or if they don't know how to communicate with you, I think a lot of times, probably 90% of the time, your approach has a lot to do with how people respond to you. So that comes with learning your spouse. If you know that they don't like confrontation, maybe talking to them over dinner, you know, in a nice calm voice would be the time to address some issues. Just learning your spouse, knowing them, and a lot of that takes time, but it also takes effort.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Very good contribution. And as she said, the approach, because certainly tone and body posture, because the thing you got to remember, that spouses have got to remember, that I'm your husband, you're not my mama, or you are my wife, I'm not your daddy. And we can't talk to one another, you know, like they're children. We've got to, again, give that respect. Simone Leonard.
Yeah, so I like what all of the comments have been so far, but I also think that sometimes we have to be really clear about what our expectations are. Like when we communicate, oftentimes, you know, I think to Edith's point, she said men don't communicate as well as women. Well, a lot of times women want our husbands to read our minds, and, you know, nobody's a mind reader. We have to be really clear and explicit with the things that we're wanting or needing or expecting. And the same with men. You know, men can be really, they can shut down. They can say what they want to say, or then they can shut down and not say anything at all. And sometimes they expect to have their minds read as well. And so I think clarity and just actually saying what an issue is really important.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, ma'am. And again, like I said, we've got to work at communicating. It takes effort because we do have to put our thoughts into words and communicate clearly. Make sure we're understood, and make sure we understand the person that our spouse that we're communicating with. In any event, in order to resolve an issue, we have definitely got to work at the communication. Harry, do you want to say something? I noticed you had your iPad unmuted.
I kept changing my mind, Brother Tucker. I said, Brother Tucker don't see me. I kept changing my mind. I said, I'm gonna change. But anyway, earlier when you was talking about love, people don't fall out of love. And, just reading this charity or love never fail. So I guess you would say there's more like a person choosing not to love. Because we know that love is an action word. It's something that you do. It's just not something that just happens. So instead of saying that person, because I've talked to a lot of people, they talk about, they fell out of love or whatever. So what would be the more proper thing to say? I guess they just choose to stop loving, or what would you say about that?
Yeah, they choose to stop caring about that person.
Yeah.
They choose to stop being kind, being compassionate, being concerned.
Yeah.
Love causes us to do all of those things. If I'm concerned about your well-being, concerned about what's beneficial to you, then I'm going to work towards fulfilling that.
Yeah.
But when I just stop caring about you, don't care how you feel, don't care if your needs are met, when I just stop caring, and that is a bad place in a relationship, because tension and issues can grow in a relationship where one person says, I just don't care. And when you stop caring, that's when you stop giving attention. You stop behaving like. That's where arrogance come in, boasting and pride comes in. You don't humble yourself to do what's beneficial for that person. You're not trying to please one another. You just sometimes going through the motion. And it's sad that there are people in relationships who they stay in relationships for financial reasons sometimes, as a matter of convenience, but it's not because I still care for that person. And so, yeah, there are people who say, well, I don't love her anymore. Well, the reason they say that is because they stop caring and being concerned about that person. However, like we talked about earlier, those vows that we take, I'm supposed to be faithful to you. I'm supposed to love and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, till death do us part. But then we forget those vows. We forget the promise we made to one another about caring for one another and about doing what is beneficial for one another. And we get selfish. And you see, that's what Paul is talking about. If we understand what Paul is saying here in 1 Corinthians 13, I can't be selfish about our relationship, my and my wife's relationship. I've got to be concerned about her as well as I am concerned about myself. But there are times when folks stop being concerned. We stop caring for the other person. And that's when, well, I just don't love her anymore. But folks have got to be reminded about those vows. Did you want to contribute something, Emma? I see you unmuted, or
yes. I was just sitting here listening because I'm divorced, but I got something I can contribute. And I was listening to Brittany and Simone, and they expressed exactly my thoughts. Because with as far as and I do think women have a tendency a lot to expect men to read their minds, and that because you probably, if you told your husband 10 times to pick up something, pick up your clothes, wash dishes, and he don't do it, and then in his mind he just brushing it off, but in your mind you thinking, I already told him this 10 times. You probably keep an account of how many times you told him, and you expect him to do it without you having to tell him again. But he just being that men do not communicate like women. They kind of like in the now, right, with what's happening right now, and women have a tendency to be more emotional, and they expect you to read their minds, know what they're thinking. If you forgot a birthday or anniversary,
Oh, yeah.
if the man forget a birthday or anniversary, things like that will cause us to be upset.
Mhm.
And the man have, because he's not a creature of emotion, he have no idea why.
Mhm.
And then I wanted to say too, as far as how you come at somebody when you feel like they're on the defense all the time. If you come at them in a tone that's like accusing them,
Mhm.
or if you because talking is not the only way we communicate. We communicate with our body language as well.
Yeah.
And if you coming at them like something you done went over and over with them again, and it's like you don't trust them, and they will just shut down.
Mhm.
They will have a tendency to just shut down. So I was like, boy, Brittany and Simone on point. They sound like two seasoned women. And I just wanted to say, I agree with everything they had to say.
And they better be seasoned. We told them, y'all better make it work. You can't come back home.
Yeah, you done a good job. You too, Brother Halbert.
I think I saw Susie's hand, Susie Blanding.
Oh, I was just gonna comment on a lot of time, we think that after so long together, you should know what I'm thinking, just like they say, which is not true, We can't read each other's mind or whatever. And it's not a perfect relationship, but the more you grow in Christ, the better it becomes. The better your relationship get, the more you understand each other. And, it's like, you don't have to ask the question all the time. It's like when, like Tim going through his situation now, I don't have to say, how you feeling? I can look at him and tell how he is feeling. And those are things that you learn through loving and caring for each other. And that's how it should be, We should have that concern. If something is going on, we can look at our spouse and tell, okay, something is wrong. He's having a bad day or whatever. And that is growth, in Christ and in your marriage. That's my point.
All right, thank you, and good point. It's like Emma was saying, we overlook things, but we certainly shouldn't have to be told over and over and over again about something. I remember one year, I forgot Mary's birthday. I only did it once. You learn not to do it again. And that's a part of learning your spouse. You learn to be concerned about what they're concerned about. And again, you learn to do what's beneficial for them. And so there is a lot. And again, this is what love requires. Love requires us to care for and to do for. And again, it is behavioral, not just emotional. Carolyn?
Just want to make a quick comment too. I think that it is very important to keep the line of communication open continually, even if you have to try different approaches. I know early on in our marriage, I learned too that Mark didn't like to communicate, and so a lot of times I didn't just say everything I wanted to say. And sometimes it was because of how I was feeling at the time. I know I would have gone at him the wrong way if I had addressed it then. And so I would put it off and not even address it because I knew that it would probably cause an argument. And so over a period of time, let it go, not to pursue talking, and just try and pick up on some on what he was thinking or feeling. And an example of what I'm referring to is on Saturday when he was getting ready to leave the house to go out and meet Brother Tim. He also took the trash out, and I saw him taking out the trash, but then he said, okay, I'm going. And I'm used to him coming back a couple of times before he actually leaves, and he didn't do it this time. And so therefore I didn't have the door locked. And when he came back, I was not happy. And so there was just an example of us really not fully communicating what was going to happen. And that was he was going to leave, and I wasn't just going to assume that he was going to come back in. So, we just really needed to communicate more. And even though one of us may not like to, it's just something that's important that we need to do.
Yeah.
And that's my comment.
Okay. And certainly communication is key. You got to be able to relate to one another. That's the only way you're going to really understand one another clearly. And that takes the guessing out. When we're able to talk about situations, that take the guessing out.
Excuse me, I was going to say too, and even though communicating is important, I know for me, I have to do it when I'm not angry. And that was one of the things that I know I failed in, because when he came back, I was angry, and that wasn't the right time to communicate, because my facial expression said that I wasn't happy. So that's it. Thank you.
And girl, a lot can be said on that, but it's 8:04. But this conversation is just starting to get real good. But we're gonna have to close out. Lord's will, we're gonna talk about love, because this is what love is all about. And Lord's will, we'll pick up on this next week, and we'll talk about it some more. And maybe you all will have thought about it, and we can share some more good stuff. Good comments by everybody. We do appreciate the comments, the contribution. It made the study real good. We're going to have a song of encouragement.